The moment my boss's wife leaned toward me in the passenger seat and whispered, "Take me somewhere private," I knew my life had just crossed a line I could never uncross. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and for several seconds, I could barely hear the rain hitting the windshield. I had spent 3 years building my reputation as a dependable employee, the kind of man who never mixed personal problems with work. But that night, one quiet sentence from the woman sitting beside me threatened to destroy everything I had worked for. What I didn't know was that she wasn't asking me for what I thought she was asking for. She was carrying a secret so painful that, by the time I discovered it, my entire opinion of my boss, my job, and even myself had changed forever. Before we continue, if you believe people sometimes deserve a second chance when life gives them no easy choices, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope. My name is Daniel Carter, and until that night, my life had been painfully ordinary. I was 32, worked as a project coordinator for a successful construction company, and lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. My boss, Richard Hale, was everything I was trying to become: wealthy, confident, respected, and seemingly untouchable. His wife, Claire, was equally admired. She was graceful, intelligent, and always kind to the employees, but there was something distant in her smile that I had noticed more than once. I never asked about it. She was my boss's wife, and some boundaries were better left untouched. That evening, the company had hosted an anniversary dinner at an expensive downtown hotel. Richard had been drinking heavily, laughing loudly with clients and barely acknowledging Claire. Near the end of the evening, he disappeared into another room with several business partners. Claire remained alone at the table, staring at her untouched glass of water. When the guests began leaving, I offered to drive her home because her usual driver had already gone. She hesitated before accepting. I thought I was simply doing the decent thing. The city was soaked in rain as we drove through nearly empty streets. Claire sat silently beside me, looking out the window. I kept the conversation polite, asking whether she was comfortable and whether she wanted me to turn the heater up. She thanked me quietly. Then, after several minutes, she suddenly leaned closer and whispered those words, "Take me somewhere private." My heart dropped. I pulled my eyes toward the road and tried to understand what she meant. I asked whether she wanted to stop somewhere safe where we could talk. She nodded and told me there was an old community garden near the river where she used to go when she needed to think. I drove there, parked beneath a large tree, and turned off the engine. Claire immediately covered her face with both hands. She began crying. Not the quiet tears people shed when they want sympathy. These were the tears of someone who had been holding something inside for far too long. She apologized repeatedly, telling me she had chosen the wrong words in the car. Then she explained why she had asked me to bring her there. She had discovered that Richard was planning to blame me for a major financial mistake inside the company. I was stunned. A missing payment of nearly $200,000 had been discovered that week. Richard had quietly altered several internal records, creating the appearance that I had authorized an unauthorized transfer. He planned to fire me the following morning and report the matter to the authorities. Claire had found evidence of the plan accidentally while searching through Richard's office for insurance documents. She had wanted to warn me before it was too late. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My first reaction was anger, followed by disbelief. Richard had always praised my work. He had trusted me with important projects. I had even defended him when co-workers complained about his temper. Now I realized that the person I had admired might have been preparing to sacrifice my future to protect his own. Claire reached into her handbag and handed me a small envelope containing copies of emails, transaction records, and photographs of documents. She told me she had taken them because she couldn't stand watching an innocent person lose everything for a crime they didn't commit. Then she said something I would never forget. She told me she was tired of being married to a man who treated people like tools, including her. For years, Claire had quietly endured Richard's controlling behavior. He had isolated her from friends, dismissed her opinions, and made every decision according to what benefited his image. She had stayed because she feared what would happen if she left. But that evening, watching him laugh while preparing to destroy someone else's life had finally broken something inside her. I drove her home afterward, but the atmosphere had completely changed. There was no romance between us, no secret affair, and no forbidden moment. There was simply two exhausted people sitting inside a car, both realizing that pretending everything was fine had become impossible. The next morning, Richard called me into his office. He had already prepared the accusation. But this time, I wasn't alone. Claire walked through the door behind me. Richard's expression changed instantly. She placed the evidence on his desk and told him she knew exactly what he had done. For the first time since I had known him, Richard looked afraid. He tried to intimidate her, then tried to blame me, but the documents told the truth. The company's legal department investigated the records, and within days, the evidence confirmed that Richard had manipulated the transactions. He lost his position. I kept my job. But Claire's story didn't end there. She filed for divorce and moved into a modest apartment across town. She started working with a nonprofit organization that helped people escape controlling relationships and rebuild their independence. She told me that she wanted her painful years to become useful somehow. Months passed. Daniel and Claire remained friends, carefully and respectfully. Neither of us rushed into anything. We had both learned that trust was something you rebuilt slowly, not something you demanded because two people felt lonely. Sometimes we met for coffee. Sometimes we talked about work, books, or ordinary things. And sometimes we simply sat in silence without needing to explain ourselves. One spring afternoon, Claire asked me why I had stopped the car that night instead of simply taking her home. I told her the truth. Because she sounded like someone who desperately needed to be heard. She smiled and said that one small act of kindness had changed her life. But she didn't know that her courage had changed mine too. I had always believed success meant earning more money, gaining respect, and climbing higher in my career. Claire taught me that success could also mean refusing to become cruel simply because the world had been cruel to you. It could mean helping someone without expecting anything in return. It could mean standing beside the truth even when the truth is frightening. A year later, Claire and I were walking beside the same river where everything had begun. She looked happier than I had ever seen her. She wasn't the nervous woman who had sat beside me in the rain anymore. She was independent, confident, and finally living a life that belonged to her. She looked at me and said that sometimes the most unexpected people enter our lives at the exact moment we need them. I smiled and told her that sometimes one small decision can change everything. And maybe that was the real meaning of that night. I thought I was simply driving my boss's wife home. Instead, I became part of the moment when she finally found the courage to drive herself toward a new life. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. Sometimes a simple act of support can remind someone that they are not alone. And before the story ends, I have one special request: comment "second chances" below if you believe that everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild their life after making it through their darkest chapter. Because sometimes everything changes in a single night, not because someone crossed a forbidden line, but because someone finally chose honesty, courage, and kindness when it would have been easier to look away. And sometimes, the person you thought you were rescuing becomes the person who reminds you how to save yourself.